Hi, I'm Claire Sinclair, Playmate of the Year 2011.
Hi, I'm Kenny Florian.
This is Daddy Yankee.
Hi, this is Terrell Owens.
I'm Brian Stain.
Hoist Gracie.
Sabina Kelly.
I'm Nick.
I'm Gene.
Joseph Benavidez.
I'm Mario Lopez.
This is Chris Weidman.
DJ Levin.
Travis Hopper Brown.
This is Bryan Callen, and guess what? You are watching MMA Weigh-In, the mother of all weigh-in shows that have MMA in front of them.
All right, welcome to the sixth round. Navid Razi with MMA Weigh-In in Dallas, and I'm very happy to welcome in the man of the hour, comedian, podcaster, actor, way too many other things to list here. Bryan Callen, welcome to the sixth round.
Wannabe athlete. You can just say wannabe athlete, wannabe fighter. Wannabe fighter, not going to happen.
Who doesn't want to be a fighter, really, if you think about it?
Every man.
So we spoke a couple weeks ago, Bryan, and I asked you who was the guy in MMA that got you most excited and hyped up to see fight, and you gave an answer I wasn't expecting, but the more I thought about it, I really couldn't argue with it, and your answer was Ronda Rousey.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that she is such an extreme winner. That intensity, she's going in there it's like life or death. It really is. I mean, you look at her and you look at her face. Losing is just not an option. And by the way, watching that Sarah McMahon, I was watching Sarah McMahon's fights. She is strong. She's athletic. She can box. She can wrestle. But it was so obvious that she was in over her head. I'm talking about mentally. You're talking about a competitor here. She's a real competitor. But, man, when you got to face Ronda Rousey and you see that look in her eyes, she couldn't even look at Ronda. And I sympathize. You know, you're talking about and the other interesting thing is I felt like Ronda's striking got even better in this fight.
Yeah.
Like it just looked better. She's working on things because I think she realizes that her one liability is striking. You know, in some ways. I mean, there are women out there that can potentially match her striking. I don't think there's anybody out there that can match her wrestling. But like with all fighters, they've got to continue to evolve because people are watching you very closely. They're going back to the drawing board with their coaches, and they're going to find holes. They're going to find openings. They did that to Fedor, and they'll do it to anybody. When you got enough people working on watching every one of your little nuances, there's a dude out there who can strike on a high level, who's going to say, look at how she leads with her chin or comes in, or look at how she's trying to grab you here. She's open for an uppercut or whatever it might be. So it's what I saw with Ronda was a different. I don't know what she did, but she looked like she was approaching her striking very differently, and she even said. I mean, the inside scoop, and I may be wrong. I don't want to put words into Ronda's mouth, but I heard she said, I'm going to drop her with a liver. She was practicing that knee. She said, I'm going to drop her with a liver shot in the first round.
Yeah, I'd heard the same thing, that she had promised her coach and her whole team that she was going to end that fight with a body shot, and she did that, throwing a pretty nasty knee. Actually, it was funny. In the original live fight, it didn't seem like it was that hard of a knee, but as they showed the instant replay and as they broke it down and they talked about the technique, I guess she landed it perfect in the solar plex, or I've heard some people say it was kind of in the
liver shot. It was a liver shot.
Yeah.
You see the way liver shots work. When you get hit with a liver shot, there's a reason that guys, a lot of times, people who get hit with a liver shot will hesitate. And the reason for that is that when you get hit, this is what I've been told by high-level K1 guys and boxers. When you get hit with a liver shot, what happens is your liver actually it rises, and when it falls back into place is when you feel the pain, and you're just debilitated.
That sounds fantastic.
I've been hit with them. I've been hit with a liver shot a couple times, and it's just so debilitating, man.
Yeah. So they had an Olympic showdown with Sarah McMahon. I was very hyped, although I'm not sure the public really bought into the hype as much as the UFC would have hoped. But
That's the challenge for the UFC. The challenge for the UFC is finding fights that people are interested in. And I have said this before, and I'll say it again. All due respect to Dana and to the Fertitta brothers, and they have a very hard job. But I do think that they are mistaken in one aspect, and that is that they are trying to keep the UFC the star and not the fighters. I think that is a mistake. I think it's a business mistake. I think it's misreading what makes people come to a sport. We watch the NBA. If you take a look at what David Stern did for the NBA, take a look at why do you think the NBA's attendance went up Do you think that the NBA people would be watching the NBA on the same with the same fervor if there wasn't Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, if there wasn't LeBron James? My God, if there wasn't Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan?
Yeah.
Why do you think people are watching? That's why. We tune in to watch human beings. And you have got to support and, in fact, celebrate your fighters. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's been done enough. I don't.
Yeah.
And I think that in a lot of ways, it really disheartens me when I hear the UFC actually thinking about not letting their fighters have sponsors for clothing, and they're going to make them wear a uniform. Mm-hmm. I don't see how that services the sport. I don't see how it services fighters. I think fighters have a very hard time making a living to begin with. Yeah. It's a very hard life. The rewards are very, very small. There are 3 people maybe who are making money. I mean, there are other people that make money, but they're making money off of their sponsorships. Mm-hmm. And I know that the UFC has a big roster. I know they're responsible to a lot of fighters, and I don't know what it's like to run the UFC. So I don't want to be too critical here because I don't know what it's like.
Yeah.
But I do think that they have to solve that problem, because what's going to happen is if it becomes a sport where it's a thankless sport, where you're forgotten and broken, where you can turn into a Chris Lieben who'd been there for 10 years. Now, granted, Chris was, not a top-ranked fighter, but see you later, Chris. Thanks for the memories.
Yeah.
I feel like there's got to be something a fight field he's going to take away from this, other than headaches and slurred speech.
What do you think
I know
the solution?
This is the story of boxing and fighting, but I just feel like what's going to happen is great athletes are not going to go into fighting.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to ask you, Brian. What do you think the solution is? Because I've talked about this many times with another colleague, John Morgan, and it seems like you're right. The UFC, instead of becoming a brand, it's kind of changed into the sport. People don't even refer to MMA as MMA anymore. They just say, hey, do you watch UFC, or I do UFC, or whatever the hell people say now. But
there's nothing wrong with that.
How do they overcome that? Because it seems, as you mentioned, the only guy I can think of that really got that promotion, maybe besides Chuck Liddell, was Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva seemed to kind of rise above the UFC brand, but
because he was such a freak.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something. You're never going to get guys like Adrian Peterson in MMA. You might get a couple examples, but for the most part, those athletes are going to go where the money is. Mm-hmm. And, it's just the way it is. And so, Anderson Silva was a physical freak and just a mental freak. I mean, he was just so far above everybody else. And that's fine. But take a look at what happened when GSP said he was going to retire. Take a look at what the UFC said about him.
Yeah.
I don't want to get into detail, but it was less than flattering.
Yeah.
That's your marquee player. That is the golden boy. If he's getting criticized, then I really shudder to think. And I think it's a mistake. I think it's a fundamental business mistake. I think that I'm using other sports that have been successful as an example, and I think the UFC is doing the opposite of it. Mm-hmm. And I wish I could talk to Dana about that. He was on my podcast, and I didn't think it was appropriate because I'm not a journalist, and I'm not, and I didn't want to put him on the spot, but it is something, if I ever have a chance to talk to Dana privately about, not that he would even listen to me, I have no business, but I do know him a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to know, because I like Dana. I'm not a fighter, so but I think Dana genuinely loves fighting. I think Dana is a very emotional guy, wears his heart on his sleeve. And, I don't think Dana's a bad guy. I don't. I know a lot of guys, he's getting a lot of criticism and stuff. I think Dana's trying to make MMA, UFC, the biggest sport in the world. Okay, fine. I just think that they're going about it wrong, and I think that, in fact, the sport and the UFC is hurting. I had an argument with a manager who said, are you crazy? It's growing like crazy. No, it's not. Look at the pay-per-view numbers. No, it's not. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't. As far as numbers-wise, that fluctuates constantly, but I do think it is a very tough spot to be in. As you mentioned, I'm also a big fan of Dana White. I can't imagine having another guy who's as serious, a David Stern or something, running the UFC. And it's nice to have a guy like Dana who just shoots off at the hip and isn't really politically correct.
He was saying to me, he goes, he answers all his Twitters. Like he yells at people on Twitter and stuff. It's hilarious. And he like when he gets criticized, he literally is like, he answers back. And somebody asked him why, and he did this. He said this on the podcast. He goes, because it's fun. It's really fun to yell at my critics. And at least Dana answers to it. At least Dana is like, look, I take full responsibility. I just have a different point of view, and I think a lot of people do. And I love fighters, man. I admire them, and and there's nothing wrong with the UFC being the big show in town. It's like the NFL, the NBA. There's one show, but those guys make a lot of money. They make a lot of money. They have very different incentive mechanisms in place. They have pensions. They make money. They have a union. There's a whole different thing for those guys. And in a way, maybe the UFC is going through this, and they're going to have to come around. It's a newer league. Yeah. It's a newer sport. They're figuring it out. But there's going to come a point where I think they're going to realize that your fighters and making marquee players of your fighters, that's what people tune in for. Yeah. Don't we?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. It's a very tough situation.
But every fighter that you talk to who retires then comes out and starts talking.
Yeah.
So there's something to be said about that. You have to listen to it.
And it's funny because there's only so many jobs you can give guys. You can only give the Chuck Liddells and the Matt Hughes and those guys so many positions within the organization to keep them under the umbrella. But you're right. I mean, after the next couple of years when other guys start to retire and aren't under the UFC umbrella, what are people going to start saying in the next 4 or 5 years that have come out once they're not afraid of repercussions from the UFC anymore?
Exactly.
Yeah. So getting back to Ronda Rousey real quick, Brian, what is next for her? I can't really think of any. Miesha Tate obviously was a very good matchup for her, but she's already fought her twice. Juliana.
It really wasn't. Like I talked to other fighters like Brendan Schaub, who trains with her and stuff. Brendan said, it ain't happening, bro, because Miesha's not doing a thing. And either, by the way, is Sarah McMahon. I mean, Brendan wouldn't even talk to me about it. And Brendan knows. He was like, nah, it's not going to happen. They're totally outclassed, these women. What's going to happen next is you've got to get somebody in there who is, I think the person that's going to beat Ronda if she doesn't retire before this is somebody who can stop her, who neutralize her throws and her wrestling, and somebody who's a very high-level striker. Yeah. There are high-level strikers out there. Some girls. There aren't. Actually, people would disagree with me, but there are women out there that can bang. Yeah.
I actually thought Juliana Pena was going to be a tough challenge potentially going down a few years. But now with that knee injury, Brian, I mean, that's so hard to come back from, especially the way she tore it. It just sounded devastating with how many different tears she actually had in her knee. I'd be very surprised if she came back and was able to do the same things as she did before the knee injury.
It was such a bummer because she looked so tough. But remember, she did look tough.
On The Ultimate Fighter.
And then went on The Ultimate Fighter. But when you're faced off with Ronda Rousey, man, look, Sarah McMahon looked devastating. Yeah. And, it's a very different game when you get in there with Ronda.
Which I have to give Sarah McMahon some props because Sarah McMahon is the first person, other than maybe one shot that I saw Miesha Tate land on Ronda Rousey, Sarah McMahon is the first person to actually put some gloves on Ronda Rousey. She hit her in the forehead a couple times in the chin. Nothing devastating to where you thought she was in trouble, but there were a few times where she was kind of wiping her forehead, thinking that she was bleeding a little bit. And I thought, hey, somebody actually put their hands on her, which is something we haven't really seen since she's been in the UFC.
If you've ever been in a ring with just boxing gloves, okay, you get caught with a good shot with a boxing glove, and I'm talking about 12, 15 out, it hurts. It hurts. You can get knocked out so easily. Yeah. Put on those little gloves, when you've been training with boxers and learning how to sit down in your punches, the margin for error in MMA is very, very small. I get so nervous. When I was watching Brendan Schaub fight Matt Mitrione, Brendan's my boy. He's a good friend of mine. And when I would watch Nate Marquardt, those guys, I get so nervous because one mistake, especially at the heavyweight division, and so anybody can be knocked out at any time. You just got to make sure you're not standing in that pipe. You got to make sure you're splitting those hands and blah blah blah. I'm not a fighter, so I don't want to get into it.
There's been some talk, Brian, about Cyborg Santos, which is almost irrelevant. She's not in the UFC. Her manager the genius Tito Ortiz said that she would die if she dropped down to 135 pounds, which really has screwed her now, especially when it comes to Dana White. I do think that Cyborg is really the only person that I would give a chance to even beat Ronda Rousey at this point.
Well,
in the game.
Cyborg would bang on anybody like a drum. There's no woman on the planet that's going to fight Cyborg. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Cyborg,
I think
you see what she did to women much bigger than Ronda. Cyborg, there's a picture on the internet of her and her husband. Her husband's a house. And if you see them, they're naked and you see them standing side by side.
Yeah.
Her back and her hips and her ass and her legs are every bit as big as her husband's.
Yeah.
That is a big, strong woman. I know she did a lot of steroids, but she's also big to begin with. She's also a freaky athlete to begin with.
Yeah.
It's not sucking down to 35. It's not even worth talking about. She's not. She can't get down to 35. I mean, maybe, but it just would be, I don't know how she'd do it. She fought at 45, right? So, all right. That was a big suck for her. I think the UFC really doesn't want Cyborg to fight.
I don't either. I don't either, and I don't blame him.
You don't want to take your golden girl out. She's not. When you see someone like Cyborg, I'm sorry, but the name itself is very fitting.
Yeah.
She does look like this sort of hybrid, machine. And I don't think people want to see a machine fight. There was something about GSP and even Anderson Silva. They, in many ways, looked like regular people. I mean, GSP got very muscular,
especially Anderson Silva. He looked like a librarian with his pink shirt and glasses, and
he's built like a tennis pro.
Yeah,
he's built like a tennis pro, taking these monsters out and talking to them while he did it. That's what sells tickets.
Yeah.
That's where my father had said, how is this guy going to beat anybody? I said, just watch. And he just couldn't believe it. If you don't know fighting and you watch the way somebody like that moves and kicks, you're like, well, that's what technique's about.
Yeah, Anderson Silva. It's funny. I thought the same thing when he first fought Chris Lieben in the UFC, and not a lot of people knew who Anderson Silva was coming over from Pride. Chris Lieben, fresh off The Ultimate Fighter, and I said, oh, Chris Lieben's going to clean the house with this guy. And Anderson Silva went in there and made him look horrible. It was ridiculous. And it's funny how I joke about this all the time. I have a few friends, if we go out or something, I say, hey, man, you got to watch who you pop off at the mouth to nowadays, because there is a little Joe Luozon sitting in the back with his glasses on reading a comic book, and you turn against him the wrong way, and you're going to wake up looking at the lights.
Listen, man, I wrestled long enough. I did enough Taekwondo. I did a little boxing. I know. I am so respectful of everybody. I know how much of a bitch I really am. I love the game, and I love to fight, and I've had my bell rung by dudes built like a CPA. I've been tapped out by guys. I don't care. First of all, I'm a bitch to begin with, but I mean, I was fairly athletic. I was a pretty good wrestler in high school. Yeah. I went to a D1 school. I think I could have made the team, but forget it, man. You get involved with these guys and you realize, just keep your mouth shut, be respectful, because that guy over there who looks like a tennis pro or a librarian or an accountant might just have a whole world of pain in his back pocket for you, and it'll happen quick.
Especially if you ever go to a live fight and see the speed that these guys throw out. It's unbelievable. But I did think of one other person, Brian, that could potentially match up with Ronda Rousey, and that would be Arianny Celeste. I don't know if you've heard all the talk back and forth lately, but Arianny came out and said Ronda wasn't a good role model for young girls, and
well, I'll answer that this way, and I like Arianny, and I know her a little bit. But of course, I know Ronda, and I love her. But I will say this: I would rather my daughter, and I have one, I would rather my daughter follow Ronda Rousey's example and lead. An Olympian, somebody who got to the top of their game at, in my opinion, the most difficult sport in the world. Because you have to know everything. Over somebody who is very pretty and a very nice girl who holds a card up and walks around a ring. That's not necessarily on the same level of accomplishment. That is not the criteria I hold up to my daughter to fulfill.
You're too nice. You're too nice, Bryan Callen. You're being too nice.
But we need Arianny. I love her. But Ronda Rousey, and I think Arianny probably knows that. Arianny's, look, Ronda took a shot at Arianny first. Said, all she does is carry a ring around. She's got, And I think Arianny kind of got hurt about it, and she came back. But,
Yeah, I mean, it's not even worth picking on Arianny about it. You're right, she was kind of defending herself, but common sense would say that a woman who's a trailblazer in the sport of mixed martial arts, and I never thought in a million years women were going to come over to the UFC, especially 3 or 4 years ago, and what she's been able to do over the last couple of years has been unbelievable. You can't even fathom.
That's what's so amazing, man. I never would have thought in a million years that I would be excited about watching women fight. I'm sorry. I like watching women play tennis, but I just tend to tune as a guy. I tend to watch men. I just like that, But listen, I find it just as exciting.
No, you're right. Fighting is MMA is the only sport to where it is exciting. I mean, you think about watching a WNBA game, and you can't find a bridge to jump off of quick enough to watch one of those games. It's horrible. So.
It's so true.
Yeah, so MMA is the one thing, at least Ronda and Gina Carano and these guys, I guess Cyborg to some extent, have drawn us in, and they're good. They're fun to watch. It's exciting, and I'm with you on this.
See Kat Zingano, I don't know what she would do.
Yeah.
God, is she pretty. I was hanging out with her a little bit at the 2 UFCs ago, and she's just she looks great. She's just a great-looking gal. I mean, some of these women are just so... Like, I really appreciate how pretty some of them are. They're tough. They're, I'm probably a little light in the ass, but I appreciate it. Like, I think Ronda's adorable.
Yeah.
So a lot of these women, like Miesha Tate's hot. A lot of these women are hot, hot and tough. So I just love seeing it, man. And that's nothing to take away from the women that aren't as hot.
Yeah.
I respect the shit out of anybody that gets into that octagon.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I can't help it. I'm a groupie.
I am too. Yeah. It's gotten to a weird point. I guess maybe it's an age thing to where I went when I first started watching this to going crazy and looking for a knockout and all this, and now I'm kind of flipping on the other side where I'm like, oh God, I hope that guy's okay. Get up. It's kind of crazy how things change like that. But Bryan, it's always so refreshing when you meet someone in person after you've seen them in so many movies and podcasts, and we met at the World MMA Awards a few weeks ago in Las Vegas, and you're so down to earth and such an absolutely cool guy. It's very refreshing.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate that. Well, life is too complicated. The longer you've been around, I think it's a good idea to stay down there. Realize just how vulnerable and how tough you're not, how smart you're not. So it's always, life is a verb, man. It's a verb. So you just keep learning.
Thanks for joining us, man. I appreciate it. You can follow Bryan Callen at Bryan Callen on Twitter. You can catch Bryan Callen on stage at the Punchline in San Francisco through Saturday night. The man, Bryan Callen, thanks for joining us, buddy. Hopefully we can do this again real soon.
I appreciate it, brother. I'll be in Minnesota at Bloomington, too, at the House of Comedy next weekend, so come on down.
Be sure to get tickets to that. Bryan Callen, very funny guy to go see. Thanks, man.
Thanks, brother. Appreciate it.
Thank
Stay
you.
in touch.